Hello, my fellow pilots. My name is Diego Alfonso and welcome to the Rules of the Checkride Part 1, General Checkride Briefing Areas. Please note that if you haven't watched the introduction or the psychology of the pilot's checkride videos, please exit now and watch them first. These videos follow a sequence and viewed otherwise will lessen its effects and may confuse you. They're designed for the purpose of helping all pilots pass any required checkride, regardless of certificates or ratings held, flight time, or experience in any category, class, or type of aircraft. Now, a little disclaimer. Throughout all these videos, every time I say examiner, I mean me and nobody else. Please note that there are two different kinds of briefings information found on these videos. One is the FAA required pre-test and pre-flight briefing, and the other one is my personal briefing. So, if you schedule a check ride with another examiner, some portions of my personal briefing may not apply. However, the required FAA briefing information will apply. Believe it or not, these rules that you're going to hear about today are not widely known. And although the intent behind the FAA required briefing is good, it is my personal opinion that when you learn about these rules the day of the check ride, it is a little too late because the stress is already at an all-time high and most of the briefing information will go right over your head. Folks, the reason for these videos is that during ground and flight training, unfortunately, the emphasis is placed on maneuvers and procedures and very little, if any, on the rules of the game, which in my book are of tremendous importance. You need to know what to expect from the examiner and more importantly, what the examiner expects from you. This knowledge, combined with the fact that the FAA requires the examiner to maintain a relaxed atmosphere, will allow you to control the stress at the time of the test. As you can see in these graphics, as the level of relaxation increases, the level of performance also increases. The first thing you should know is that I do have two bad habits. One is speaking too loud at times. That comes from flight instructing in the early days when headsets were considered a luxury item and very expensive to boot. And I didn't use them for over 6,000 hours. Therefore, a habit of speaking louder than required developed. So if I raise my voice, it does not mean that I'm upset or nothing like that. As a matter of fact, if you hear me speaking loudly, please let me know, as I'm trying really hard not to do it. Can you imagine giving instruction in a cloth airplane with no soundproofing whatsoever and most of the time sitting in the back? My friend, you will be yelling too. The second bad habit is shaking my legs. I don't know why. Probably just nervous energy. Maybe I should be a little bit nervous too, because really I don't know how you fly. Just kidding there. However, if you are thinking about an answer and then all of a sudden you see me shaking, that could be misperceived as impatience on my part. That is not the case. Continue thinking for as long as you need. Okay, let me warn you about these particular videos. There is nothing harder to explain or to sit through than regulations or recommendations of any kind. It's like watching paint dry. These videos happen to fall into that category. That's why I chose a questions and answer format for three reasons. First, I believe that this way it is easier to grasp and retain information than if a lecture format was followed. Second, each question addresses a specific issue of concern during the oral portion of the test, clarifying any misconceptions or gray areas existing in the pilot's mind. And third, I think that this way is a lot easier to tolerate the pain. And as uncomfortable as it may be, still is a very small price to pay in order to obtain favorable results come Checkride Day. Now, let's get to the meat and potatoes. So here is the first question. Why are briefings required by the FAA for all checkrides? The reason for these briefings is to allow you, the pilot applicant, to know how the checkride will unfold by having an overall idea of the test, avoiding any surprises for you or the examiner. Everybody should be on the same page. In other words, you have to know the rules of the game. What is the examiner's job during the practical test? During the oral portion, the examiner's job is simply to determine that the pilot applicant meets the acceptable knowledge standards of all the required tasks for the certificate or rating sought. During the flight check, the examiner's job is simply to determine that the pilot applicant meets the acceptable practical test standards set up in the PTS. The examiner's job is not to approve or disapprove anybody. You know what? That's your job. Do we have to do the complete checkride in English? The FAA requires that the complete checkride, meaning the oral portion, the flight portion, and the post-briefing portions, shall be conducted in English. That is it. English is the ruling language, my friends. Which are the outcomes of the practical test? Well, let's talk about the ground oral portion of the test first. If you meet the FAA acceptable knowledge standards during the ground oral portion of the test, the flight will take place. In the case that you don't meet them, the examiner will stop the oral test, issue a notice of disapproval, and the flight will not take place. Next, if at any time you or the examiner doesn't feel well, the oral test can be discontinued, and a letter of discontinuance will be issued. During the flight, the first outcome is that if you meet the FAA acceptable standards for the flight, a temporary pilot certificate will be issued. Second outcome, if you don't meet them, a notice of disapproval will be issued. Third outcome, if the flight portion of the practical test cannot be started or completed because of weather, airworthiness issue, illness, or any other situation, a letter of discontinuance will be issued. What are the options if the oral or the flight test is terminated because I don't meet the acceptable standards? If at any time during the oral or the flight the test is terminated because of unsatisfactory performance, the test may be continued only if you would like to continue and the examiner agrees. If you choose to do so, credit will be given for all the tasks that were completed satisfactorily. The deficient areas will be visited during the retest. What are the options if a letter of discontinuance is issued? The letter of discontinuance is not a disqualification of the test. On the contrary, credit will be given for any and all tasks that were satisfactorily completed prior to the discontinuance. If you don't feel physically fit before the flight, you should cancel the flight. If you feel physically ill, airborne, you will inform the examiner and return to the airport. The FAA expects that good decisions are made every time you fly, not just on Checkride Day, however. Additionally, the letter is good for 60 days from the date of issuance, and it does not extend the expiration dates of the knowledge test result, the Airman Medical Certificate, the required instruction endorsements, and your graduation certificate from an FAA-approved pilot course. Keep in mind that a letter of discontinuance cannot be issued if you tell the examiner that you don't feel well after you have demonstrated on acceptable standards and the test was terminated. If I don't meet the eligibility requirements, will I be charged a fee? No. The fee for the Checkride will be collected after you have been qualified and meet all the requirements for the test. If I discontinue the oral or the flight because I don't feel good, will I be charged a fee? No. There will be no additional charge for discontinuing the oral. The only inconvenience should be that the test will be rescheduled at a later date, and that would be your inconvenience. If things don't go well and a notice of disapproval is issued, is there a charge for the retake? Yes. If a notice of disapproval is issued, there will be a fee for the recheck. The examiner will tell you the amount of the recheck. It may vary depending on the nature and the extent of the disapproval. Can I stop the test temporarily to study or practice a procedure or maneuver and then resume the test? The examiner must not suspend a test temporarily to allow the applicant any further study or to practice any procedures or maneuver, and then continue the same test later. Please be aware that when the practical test begins, there are only 3 options to end it, and they are temporary certificate, a notice of disapproval, or a letter of discontinuance. That's it.